Hello and welcome to the very first Media Network podcast from MHP Group. I'm Michaela, one of 10 former journalists here, and in this podcast we'll bring you exclusive insight from the UK media industry and interpret what it means for business communications. We'll be hosting the who's who from the media world, along with our own experts for in-depth discussion. Joining us in this episode, Becky Barrow, news editor of The Sunday Times, Anthony France, senior news correspondent at The Evening Standard, and our very own Keith Gladdis, head of strategic media at MHP Group and former news editor of the Daily Mail. Thank you all for taking time out of very busy schedules and welcome to our office. Let's begin with a fly-on-the-wall view of what's taking place in your newsrooms. We know what makes the front page, what makes the homepage, but what is it that's really getting the news conference buzzing at the moment? And Anthony, I'll start with you.
Very much coming from a perspective of a London newspaper, is very much transport at the moment. And obviously, as we speak, there are a number of strikes that are going on the main line, and also to do with teachers, and that is the story for us in London.
And strikes, of course, impacting everybody across the country too. Becky, what's getting the news conference buzzing at the Sunday Times?
I think at the Sunday Times, it's always politics that is the sort of the heart of the paper or the website. At the moment, like Anthony, there's a lot of interest in strikes and how they're affecting sort of growing numbers of industries. And I would say there's always a background noise of the royal family at the moment. So the royal story just seems to be one that keeps on giving.
Now, particularly for a Sunday publication, the challenge always the in-depth insight versus the breaking news during the week. How are you pushing your reporters to find that insight at the moment?
We don't really do breaking news. We do, if it happens on a Saturday, of course we do. But typically what the Sunday Times does, it's about bigger investigations, larger scale projects, taking on a theme of the week and doing a long read about it, doing an analysis of something that's happening in Ukraine. So we tend to leave breaking news to the BBC and the many other places where you can get live news, and we try and do bigger, better written, better researched, thorough pieces.
And in terms of putting those together, what's a really great source look like for a journalist, and particularly if they were leaning on the business industry? Are you looking for a particular type of insight at the moment? Is it maybe deep insight related to consumers? Is it perhaps sources inside Parliament? You talked about politics being particularly.
I would say we're always looking for any source with a good story to tell. I mean, what we really need is experts in whichever field. And what we know works, because we can obviously see from how people read online, we know what people like to read, and what they love reading with us is expert analysis. So whether that's Tim Shipman being our chief political commentator, talking about what's happened in Westminster that week, or it's somebody talking about, I don't know what Elon Musk has done at Tesla. It's about... we want experts, whoever they are.
So that's really interesting, isn't it? So in the past, it'd be instinct, this is what the reader thinks, but now you've got that real-time understanding of what they're interested in.
Yeah, I mean, we've got no idea how people read print on a Sunday, but we know what they read online. And so that helps us, that guides us as to what we should do more of. So, for example, on the Ukraine war, when we were publishing huge numbers of stories in February, March, April last year, what was most read was the experts writing about, rather than just the sort of breaking news of a bomb's landed or a city's fallen.
Sure.
So people are looking for analysis, they're trying to understand things.
Yeah, very much. Well, I don't know about a daily, but I'm saying for a Sunday, people like longer reads, they like analysis. They like the expert view.
And when you say expert, who is that you prefer? Is it an independent expert? Is it someone who's from within a business?
Typically independent, yeah. but yeah, whoever knows their field.
Okay. And Anthony, for you, day to day, what are readers really looking for in news coverage at the moment?
Yeah, so I mean, today has been, reporters are all over the country. We've got the missing lady in Lancashire. We've also got the fatal dog attack up in Milton Keynes. There was an incident in London as well. Today we've also got the missing aristocrat in London. That investigation which has taken down to East Sussex. So journalists are all over, and just as you said, we can see what in real time what readers are interested in, and if there is something like we did on the aristocrat, a long read, in depth, speaking to the family, very much what we find works is if it's a story or analysis that isn't available elsewhere. And people obviously are interested in it and they want to read more.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because people can get breaking news anywhere now. You can get it on Twitter, you can get it on any social media feed. But you're both saying that actually what people are looking for is more in-depth analysis. They're looking to understand what's going on.
Yeah, definitely.
And you see that as an area of growth for the media as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very, very clear trend for us for a while now. So we can see that, let's say some poor child is stabbed on a Saturday or something awful like that, people don't come to the Sunday Times to read that story. So we tend not to do them.
But it's different for you, Anthony, because you're every day, you're live.
Yeah, some of the best performing stories this week were, Mick Lynch gave a speech, the R&T boss gave a speech, and the numbers of that were huge. He gave a speech in Parliament and people wanted to read it and people were sharing it. There's a lot of interest in those sort of stories, and even though, they're not there, they are interested in, what is being reported.
One of the interesting things you mentioned in the past is that, yes, you have the news website that people use, but your social media channels, so Twitter and Facebook, are really important as well, because you populate those.
And we've just recently, we've recently started with TikTok, and the growth in that has been huge. And we're now second behind the BBC on TikTok, which is like, something that we wouldn't have done years ago.
And you wouldn't necessarily associate TikTok with hard news, but are people turning to that platform for both sides of the news, the light and the shade?
Yes, absolutely. There are benefits. If you're getting the news out there, there are all these channels that are being there to be used.
For both of you, a lot of doom and gloom, as we've just spoken about in the news at the moment, as there always is, of course. How do you find that light and shade? How do you strike a bit of balance in your publications?
It's a struggle. I think I've lost count of the number of times I've said to journalists, do you have anything that's more positive, that's more constructive? We are overwhelmed with negative news. In the last 6 years that I've been on the news desk, if you just go through all the awful things that have happened, the list is very long. So every week it is a struggle to find more positive stories. I mean, our aim is to focus on constructive news. So even if a story is very negative, you want to find something that will sort of be more constructive for the reader, more positive. Because nobody wants to open a newspaper or click onto a website or however they're consuming news and come away from it and feel downtrodden.
It's a really interesting point. Are there any stories that really stand out recently that were able to offer that? Tough question.
Well, we try and do it every week. I would say that people... I mean, if I'm going to say examples like royal stories, stories about dogs, stories about things like companies that do, like, I think sometimes companies think that we only want to write about chief executives being sacked or them sacking half their staff. But actually, we did a story the other day about a company that was introducing a 4-day week, and everybody was going to be on the same money, but they were going to work 4 days a week. And then a year down the line, they found that people are a lot more productive and it'll really work for them. That's a great story. Yeah. It's really positive. Other companies might follow their example. The readers want to read it. That's the sort of thing that we need more of, which is happening, but maybe they think it's not news. And it's not officially, it's not news as in the Queen has died news, but it is news in that people are interested in reading it.
Is it about a different approach? So there's been a lot of stories recently about tech layoffs. Yeah. And we saw recently the boss of eBay laid people off, but said he'd do it with compassion and empathy. Does that change the way that you might view that organisation?
About the process of sacking people?
Yeah.
I would say that if a company's getting rid of people, you know, it doesn't matter how they communicate it. I mean, if it's done by text message, that's obviously awful. But generally, sacking is a sacking, or redundancies are redundancies. I guess sometimes on LinkedIn, if the boss makes a really stupid statement or comment, that gets some pickup. So I would say generally, but we would, redundancies aren't great stories. They're just depressing. And they come around too often. And the only thing that distinguishes them if the boss does them really badly.
So it's more a case of doing it badly than
it's
doing
more
it well.
A case of doing it badly, yeah. I mean, there's no particularly good way of doing it.
Talking about redundancies, about layoffs, then that brings us on to our next subject, which is cost of living. Yeah. Cost of living, of course, front of mind for everyone, whether you're a consumer watching your own spending or you're a business watching how much your consumers are spending. And of course, businesses are really vying to continue to grow their customer base or retain it at this time. Really tricky spot to be in, and media attention is what they certainly want to help them with that. Anthony, the Evening Standard, you've published dozens, if not hundreds of stories about cost of living in recent months. What then keeps it new and interesting for your readers? What are the angles?
There's always different ways of telling it. I mean, in today, where someone carried out a survey, to measure the amount of coffee, being in coffee shops, in various coffee shops, or, the Lurpak story where, how much that's gone up by a tub, things like that are always things that they're just different ways of telling the story that resonate with people, who are consumers who go out into shops.
Yeah, but it's the detail that they want.
Yeah.
So a story that's just the cost of living's gone up, we all know that. Everybody's experiencing it. What we're after is the example, like Lurpak was a perfect example of, it was a product, people recognise it, there'd been a huge increase in price, and what was the reason? That works as a story. So it's about thinking of the detail. And I often say to the journalists, how would you tell that, to the young journalists, how would you tell that story in the pub? Mm-hmm. So, and that often changes the way they think what the story is, because they know that in the pub, their mates are not going to listen to them if she says, the cost of living's gone up. But if you say, have you heard the price of Lurpak's gone up 80% in a year, or whatever the figure was, I don't remember, that gets people's attention. So it's that we need the detail, we need the actual example of a product, or all pasta's gone up, or how the price of a coffee's gone over £3.50. I don't drink coffee, so I don't know the price of it, but I'm just saying generally, if it's reached a sort of point, oh my goodness, who's ever paid £5 for a packet of cereal or something?
And so at the Sunday Times then, are you wanting to really bring it back to the impact on the individual? Is that what you're looking for at the moment?
Yeah, I'd say generally, because people are essentially quite selfish mostly, and they're mostly interested in, okay, how does this affect me, and how does this affect my kids, and how does this affect my grandkids, or whoever they're interested in, they are basically interested in themselves and their family.
And do you think there's a bit of fatigue around the whole cost of living issue? Do people, like you were saying before, are looking for hope? They're looking for something shinier?
I think so, more, and we know that's what we want to do. We want to be a constructive newspaper.
Is it of interest then to hear about what businesses might be doing in order to assist customers at this time, perhaps? Various initiatives that businesses are trying to put in place to, as I said before, retain those customers, let alone try and grow them at this time?
Yeah, but often when we are contacted by companies, I'm sure Anthony finds the same, it's very wishy-washy, it's very general, we're here to support you. We can't get a story out of that. And, good for the company, well done them, but it doesn't give us any of the details that I was just saying we need.
So it's got to be really tangible.
It's got to be tangible details, like, and if it's just we're going to support our customers because we know times are tough, there's nothing we can do with that as a story.
Thinking about a business then that's going to try and pitch in a story about what it's doing at the moment to support customers, what do you really need to hear from them for that to be newsworthy?
We need a press release that's got quotes in English rather than corporate speak. So English that's a bit more colloquial. The words you'd actually say rather than the words that, once they've gone through the legal department and HR and marketing and another press release and the chief executive. So just colloquial English, quotable English, and with details in it. So rather than just something that's very generic saying we want to help all our customers, say this is what we're actually doing and this is how we're doing it and this is what it's going to achieve. So yeah, detail and good English.
The point about language, I think, is a really great one. And Anthony, tell me about the impact that would have in your news articles as well. What's a great quote?
I was just about to pick up on what you said there, but when they come in with an idea, for example, I went to Sainsbury's the other day and I noticed that the reduced products are now on the same shelf as the ones that are slightly newer. So rather than sort of almost taking away that stigma for people rushing to the reduced shelf, that they've now got them, so if it's, literally on the day, it's now marked down, and if they sort of said, well, what we're doing at the moment is we're trying to encourage people, instead of, reaching at the back where I do, for the one right at the back, take this one, instead, and then, we then reduce food waste. How would it impact on us? In terms of?
Well, thinking about Becky's point about having a press release, having a quote that's in real normal layman's terms, are you seeing too much corporate speak, and what kind of language do you really need?
And a lot of the best PRs will follow that in with a phone call. So yes, they put out the corporate speak, but they say, but by the way, this is what it's really about. You'll find that in the press release, but this is they'll have a conversation with you about it.
It's really interesting, but the language with the quote in a press release, because your stories, I should imagine, are 500 words at most sometimes, and that can be the only area really that an organisation can get its voice. Yeah.
So you can imagine that, yes, a company has said, here is the press release. There's a press release we put it out, but if you've got somebody, or you've got a senior person at the company who's willing to speak to a journalist about it and explain a little bit more about what it's about, that works.
Okay, so a bit of explainer as well behind the press release. Now, thinking about people who are just starting their career in public relations, and very often it's people at the more junior end who are picking up the phone and pitching in the stories. Can you both give just a little bit of advice, certainly a press release in plain English? What else would you say to those younger people who are just starting out getting connected to the media industry?
Good question. Don't call up and say, did you get my press release? Which it's amazing how many people still do. I find some of them are very overfamiliar. So when I get an email from a PR with like 2 kisses at the end, I find that sort of, maybe that ages me, but I find that I find it a bit overfamiliar. I think they need to think about, okay, what sort of working week does this journalist work? So my weekend is Sunday, Monday. I work Tuesday to Saturday. So anybody who contacts me on Monday is contacting me on your Sunday. It's terribly irritating. Equally, the ones who contact me on a Friday, when I'm building up to my busiest time, Friday, Saturday, bet you're looking forward to the weekend tonight. You think, so it's just basic stuff like that. Just be conscious. Make sure you've read the publication. So don't ask me how to spell my name or really anybody else's name. Like if you want to contact the business editor, you've got to know how to spell his name.
Absolutely.
So it's really basic stuff, and and also please provide a telephone number. So on an email sign-off, journalists like to talk to people. That's what we do in the street, in a room, over the phone, but we need to talk. We don't want to do it over email. Sometimes email's incredibly useful, but she's not the only form of communication. And younger PRs particularly seem to be very hesitant to take a phone call or make a phone call.
Interesting. And how about for businesses as well? For a journalist who's wanting to speak directly to a business, are they able to get the phone numbers they need, or are you finding that businesses are pulling back on that as well?
Yeah, that can be a struggle as well. That so, you know, you go to the About Us or Contact Us, and if it's only an email address, it's really irritating because we've got to be able to pick up the phone. So just provide contact details, and even better, pick up the phone when you get a phone call. Because very often when we're trying to do stories that, like I said, constructive, positive stories, you know, let's say we're trying to contact a small business or a medium-sized business or even a FTSE 100 business, and you think, this is a good story for you guys. Like, you really want this to be published. I'm calling from the Sunday Times. Why is there not a phone number? And if there is a phone number, why aren't you picking it up? It's a very common problem.
Anthony, pet peeve?
I was going to say, and also if you're sending a press release out to all these publications, have somebody ready. You know, so if it's going out at 9 o'clock, have somebody ready that if journalists come back immediately saying, "Can we speak to so and so?" They're there, they're waiting for them, you know, to speak to.
And have a case study ready. So if your story is, I don't know, Company A has made a new type of table and it's a really clever table because it heats up in the winter and I don't know. Anyway, whatever, clever table press release. So I need to speak to somebody who's got one of these tables and will pose with the table. It's a very bad example, but you just have the case study ready for a story that it's not going to work without a case study.
Okay, makes sense. Imagery as well, is that important? I mean, the websites, what more do you want? Do you want video perhaps?
Well, very often video, but I mean, we have our own video team or we'll send them out. But it's very often a picture will really help a story, whatever the picture is. And we're looking for all different types of images, but we do need a picture. I mean, that's often why I would say why do royal stories get so much space, because they always provide good pictures.
You know, you've got to be thinking like, you know, what is the picture? You know, that's
just to give it a chance to
give it a chance.
Brilliant. All lots of excellent tips there. Thank you very much. We'll be sure to share those on.
But did I make a big enough point about you've got to read the publication?
Yes, and let's now talk about what lies ahead in 2023 and what really are the priorities for both of your publications in the year ahead. Thinking in terms of the sort of topics we've been reading a lot of about, how are you seeing the news perhaps develop? What are you looking for, I suppose, over the coming months? Anthony?
Well, it's going to be a very big year in politics this year, and you know, we'll be watching how Rishi Sunak's government fares, and you know, how Sir Keir Starmer you know, steps up to potentially a general election in the following year. It's going to be a very big year, and it's going to be a roller coaster.
Mm-hmm. And Becky, what about when we think of the difference between print and digital? What are you looking at in the year ahead?
Well, they're quite different audiences, print and digital. So print tends to be an older audience, and digital is younger. And the difference, it means that we actually curate our digital edition, and it's different to the print edition. So there'll be stories that appear in print that won't appear in digital. And there will be stories that appear in digital that don't appear in print. And that often is something that confuses people. When they don't understand, a company says, "I don't understand, you did this interview with us and I can only see it on page 3, but where is it online?" Well, they're not mirror images of each other. And what are we looking for in those two editions? The same that we always look for, that mix of stories. And with the focus being on more constructive stories.
Okay. Now, could the same story run across both if you were provided with perhaps a breadth of material? If you had a video, if you had an image?
Yeah, a lot of stories run across both. A lot. I mean, I would say probably most of them appear in both, but it's not 100%. So we'll drop things from the print edition for digital, and equally we will publish things that we know all week are going to be online only. What helps digital? I mean, yeah, videos help, but it wouldn't really help a story. It wouldn't make us do it, but it's sometimes some stories only work as videos. That we found that actually we've got experience now where you think nobody actually read it, but everybody watched the video. So people like to consume news in different ways.
Just thinking about the way people consume news, and you've got the website. Do you I've noticed you drop things now on a Saturday night, so it's not all about Sundays.
No.
So a good deal of the Sunday Times I can read on a
6
Saturday
o'clock
night.
on Saturday, yeah.
What's the thinking behind that?
It's about owning the story. So if we've got a very good story and we put it out at 6 o'clock on Saturday, then it's ours. And in like 10 years ago, you would have thought that you're giving your really good stories to other publications to follow. So we can publish and then the Mail on Sunday can rip it off and put it on the front page, which has happened many times. It's a different mindset now. It's about, okay, we now have an audience that comes to us at 6 o'clock, and that's a great audience for us to have. And it means that we're sort of owning it. Does that
And
make
it's
sense?
so different to when I was in Sunday newspapers, when sometimes if you had a really great story, you'd hold it back until after midnight so no one else could get it on the Sunday. But you're actually got eyeballs on the Saturday night.
Yeah. So people will know, okay, I want to do Tim Shipman's read, and Roy Anikar will do a fantastic royal story, and there'll be an interview with Pamela Anderson. So we do a mix, but the 6 o'clock on Saturday is a big thing for us now.
What about you, Anthony? Are you trying to get people at different times? Because it's the Evening Standard, it was always about the commute home.
Yeah.
Is it different now?
It's very different, yeah. So we've got the audience is very different in the morning to it is in the evening. So we now have staff in the evening because we know that online there is that pickup at about between 6 and midnight, which we previously, once the paper had come out, there wasn't a need to feed that audience, but we now know that there is that evening audience where people have gone home and they're on Facebook or social media or whatever, and as Becky said, it's growing and growing.
Okay. Now, we've talked about what you would really like to see PRs provide to journalists to support their stories. Now, what about the main challenges for journalists in the year ahead? What do you think they're going to be up against in the search for that great news?
I think it's a real struggle to find news that's not really depressing. If you've read all about strikes and how your kid's school is closed and your train to get into the office, the driver's on strike and you can't get an ambulance, and it's just very depressing when you put it all together, and political turbulence and warring members of the royal family, and if you add it all together, it's a struggle. It's what's happening, but we need to find the stories that cheer people up. And those negative stories, you need to find, a way of making them a bit more positive.
Anthony, what's the main challenge at the moment for you?
Yeah, making things lighter.
Mm-hmm. All right, excellent. Thank you both. Well, let's move on to something lighter, in fact, and let's talk about the value of really recognising quality journalism. I think we often hear the words journalism is under threat in all sorts of circumstances. Right now it's competing with social media commentators, with the rise of AI, something we're going to talk about in a future episode. There's so many sources of news and entertainment out there. Surely it makes it all the more important to recognise really great journalism that's having a big impact. Something that we do here is MHP's 30 to Watch. Keith, tell us a bit about that and how it recognises journalists.
Oh yeah, 30 to Watch it's amazing, and it's amazing for a couple of reasons. One, it recognises young talent in the media, which is hugely important. Two, it's recognised now by the industry as being something that everyone wants to be part of. And I think there are two reasons for that. The first one is it's free to enter. So I think for so many different awards, you have to have the backing of the news desk, who are then going to pay for you to enter. For 30 to watch, you can enter yourself. And that's really good. And I think it explains why we get so many entries. We got 400 last year. And then I think the second thing is that it's really hard now for journalists to sort of talk about themselves, and they have to have their own social media presence. They have to have their own, almost, it's their own brand. And being a 30 to watch winner really helps them with that. So each year we do it. We have a great judging panel. Becky's been a judge in the past. Anthony's a judge this year. And it's a real opportunity to just celebrate what's really great out there. And some of the journalists that we've recognised in the past have gone on to have fantastic careers. You've got Sophie Ridge, who's at Sky News now. You've got Ollie Shah, who's a former winner, who's obviously at the Sunday Times as well. So we're looking forward to it this year. It launches at the end of February, and we'll have a big celebration on May 31st.
Becky, tell me, what's the sort of thing that you're going to be looking for in those entries? What creates award-winning journalism?
Journalism or journalists?
Bit of both, I suppose.
So people think I think they think it's just about the writing. And of course, that's a lot to do with it. It needs to be beautifully written prose and accessible as well. So people need to understand it, and no acronyms and jargon. But it's really about making sure you've spoken to enough people. So you don't need one voice in a story, you need lots of voices in a story. And understanding a subject in the round. So if you want to do an article about, I don't know, nice supermarkets, don't just speak to Waitrose. Speak to Waitrose, speak to Whole Foods, speak to the, I don't know, deli counter of Asda that's trying to be fancier. So just speak to as many people as you can. That's what it's all about.
And Anthony, to be a journalist who's prepared to do that, to go that extra mile, what kind of attributes do you think are needed in a young journalist these days?
Well, I'm glad now that the newsrooms are filling out as well, because they can kind of pick up the experience from people, older hands, and there's nothing I like more than going around a newsroom, because as far as I'm concerned, every single one of them has got a story, and and they will get it from various other ways, but it's kind of extracting that. Some can tell you easier than others can do, but then as Becky was saying, once they've got an idea, getting as many people to comment on it as well. I mean, in terms of the 30 to watch, the names on there, as soon as you told me the names, these were people I was thinking of anyway. Yeah. And I think what's impressive for me is that as an industry, that there are so many really, really good journalists there. At a time when we were all told that journalism is dying, not at all. There are very, very impressive people, and they're across all different platforms as well. Some of them have got their YouTube channels. Some of them, there's one particular journalist I'm thinking of at the moment who's like her own, one person BBC. She's filming stuff. She's doing radio stuff. She's doing news content. It's great. It's brilliant. It's just telling stories in a totally different way that perhaps we didn't.
How difficult is it to attract new talent, say to the Sunday Times? Have you got people falling over themselves to work for you, or is it hard to find the right kind of person?
No, we're not short of applicants for any job that's advertised. Thank goodness. And also, I'm relieved journalism has moved to a place where jobs are advertised. Because, when Keith, Anthony and I started out, it was sort of word of mouth. And have you heard, they're looking for somebody. Now it's just an open, transparent system, which is obviously much better. So no, we're not sure. They're incredibly impressive, the young journalists. I look at their CVs and think, God, it's a lot better than mine was. They seem to have, they've all got masters. Why do they all have masters? They're all multilingual. They seem to also climb mountains and play 3 instruments to grade it. They're incredibly impressive. I'm in awe of their skills and how high achieving they are. So yeah,
That is
lots of
impressive.
journalists. I mean, I would say that I think that for young journalists, they're better off starting on a daily, certainly. I think it's very, very difficult to come to a Sunday and succeed. You get the odd example, Gabriel Pogren being one who's you get the odd just utterly exceptional, brilliant young journalist, but mostly it's a very difficult place to start because we don't, Anthony can say to a young reporter, go to this court case, cover that trial, they'll be there for 2 weeks, they'll get a page lead every day, for example. On a Sunday, we don't really do that. Yeah. So they've got to be real self-starters, which is wonderful, but it tends to suit slightly more experienced journalists.
How important is it to get those exclusives, to be a story getter? You talked about the importance of being able to write, being able to tell the whole story, but there is a very unique skill, isn't there, in sort of extracting an exclusive?
Yeah, and also that a journalist, often they don't realise what they've got, and you sort of have to talk it out of them. You referred to that as well, and that's what a news desk does. It's about spotting, that is a brilliant story. And maybe they've pitched you 5 ideas, but they don't realise that one is just brilliant. And actually, don't worry about the other ones, just absolutely go for that one.
Thinking then about submitting an entry for MHP's 30 to watch, what do you think a journalist, when they're looking at their portfolio, what should they look at as that's a standout piece that I should really be recognised?
I'd pitch a mix. You don't want 3 stories on child pornography, for example. So I'd show that you're very good at, let's say, if it's 3 entries, 3 different things. Show that you're quite a flexible writer.
Excellent. Okay. Final word from you, Keith. What do you hope to see in this year's awards?
Well, what we really like is last year we got so many entrants from the regions. So it wasn't just London. In fact, we got entries from abroad as well because we've got an international category. And it was just such a real mix, a real diverse mix of journalists. There were many journalists who don't actually work for titles, as Anthony said. They were actually just citizen journalists. And with them, it was about, as you said, Becky, just having a range. You have 3 entries, just making sure that you can show you've got real breadth. But what we really want to see is just people who are real self-starters and people who can go on to make a big name for themselves in the media. So we're looking forward to getting lots of entries.
Terrific, I'm sure we will. And an excellent point to end a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much to our guests, Becky Barrow, Anthony France, and our very own Keith Gladdis. For more insight from the media world, subscribe to this podcast and keep reading the Media Network fortnightly newsletter. I'm Michaela Gray. From everyone here at MHP Group, thanks for tuning in.